Hello, I'm Anne-Marie McAleese. Welcome to the Your Place in Mind podcast. Stories about places and people that make Northern Ireland unique. Now, this week's is a sad yet inspiring story of personal and professional triumph against the odds, as told by Kilrea man Philip Holmes in his book Gates of Bronze, published last year. Philip's life has taken him from Kilrea to Belfast to England and most recently Nepal. One of his favourite places to go, though, when he's home, is for a walk round the graveyard of Kilrea First Presbyterian Church on Maharaj Street in the town.
I used to come to church here every Sunday, and I'd come in and out, and I didn't realise that I had a very distinguished ancestor over at rest here at the back, and he goes by the very, very ordinary name of John Smith.
And we're just stepping up onto the grass in between the headstones, picking our way very carefully. And here it is, just out of that winter sunshine. Very big black headstone.
Yes, it's a lovely piece of Irish history and a lovely bit of Kilrea history, because my great grandfather was the Reverend John Smith. Now, he was the Presbyterian minister in this church, and he was known as a firebrand preacher, and there was a lot of them around in this country over the years, but there we are. He was also one of the ringleaders of the County Derry United Irishmen. Of course, that was largely a Presbyterian thing in those days, certainly in the north it was. And he was taken off with 11 or 12 other of the ringleaders from the rebellion, and he ended up in Carrickfergus jail, and then he ended up in a prison ship in Belfast Lough, and then from there he was taken over to Fort George in Inverness, and he was imprisoned there for 2 years, and then he was released, and he actually came back to Kilrea, and he died in his bed. He died, as you can see here, 3 weeks after his wife. All the other people who were taken off were either executed or sent off to the colonies or whatever. It's a wee bit suspicious that he came back, but let's not go into that. But the thing that's actually very intriguing is that in 1987 I was stationed in Fort George, Inverness, as a British Army officer. He must have been turning in his grave when I was there, and I was totally unaware that of this little bit of family history. So here in this little area, you've got this great piece of history. And they even had a guillotine in Kilrea at this time as well, which they tried it out, but then it was discovered by the authorities, and that was the end of it. But the actual rebellion here went off as a bit of a damp squib. I mean, they all sort of gathered around on the 6th of June 1798, and then I think they went home, basically.
History here, there and everywhere that I was expecting. I thought you were going to have these fond and happy memories of growing up as a nipper, as a boy in Kilrea, which you did.
Yes,
so you
indeed,
know this town very well.
Yes, very much so. Yes, I was born in Kilrea. I mean, coming back now, it's always the same. It loses something. I mean, that old cliche of it was all green fields when I was, and in many ways it was. I mean, it was lovely moorland and lakes. It was a great place to run around and play and go fishing, and you sort of come back now and so much of it's built up.
And you've got the ban here just on the other side of George Hutchinson's, which is a place I know you would have walked and played and run when you were wee. But there's a bit of rose-coloured spectacles, isn't there?
And certainly in those days, I mean, you get out and about, and I mean, your mum or your dad would pretty well throw you out on a Saturday, and you went off on your bike, and that was that. You went wherever you wanted, and there was no worries about this, that, or the other thing. And
well, you left here after schooling, and you went to Queen's. You trained as a dentist, and then very quickly after that training, you did join the army.
Correct. Yes. I joined the army for 3 years. I was 22, and I thought I'll just extend my student days a wee bit and have a bit of fun and all the rest of it. And I ended up staying for 17, so I got rather more than I expected. And that included then going to Fort George and Inverness for that short tour.
My goodness. And that's how you met your wife?
I met my first wife. At that time I was stationed in Germany. I went on a skiing holiday, and I met my first wife on a drag lift, on a ski lift. And just got into conversation. It went on from there. So that was a lady called Esther Benjamins.
Who's very significant, of course, always has been and always will be in your life, in our story today, and the book Gates of Bronze. Congratulations on the publication of that. But out of great personal tragedy, Philip, your life took on a whole different dimension that you couldn't barely have imagined it would.
Yes, I mean, essentially my first wife very tragically took her own life in January 1999. She wrote a very brief suicide note saying that life without children had become unbearable for her. And we wanted to have children, they didn't come along. and that was the culmination of that. At least certainly that was the case on the face of it. I think there were other aspects to it now which I write about in the book. But in January 1999, I had this awful tragedy to deal with, and I felt the need to respond to that suicide note and to find the children that Esther had yearned for. So I decided on the spot to leave the army, to leave dentistry as well, and set up a charity, a children's charity in her memory. And I decided that the country that I would work in would be Nepal, and that was really a fallout from the kind of connections with the British Army and the Brigade of Gurkhas and so on. The one little catch with it was that I'd never been to Nepal before. I'd never been to Asia before. You know, I always say the ticks were in all the wrong boxes from an HR point of view. You know?
This was a huge decision, but you were determined to honour Esther's memory and dedicate your life to helping children in the direst of need.
Yeah.
Because when you did get to Nepal, you must have been appalled yourself at the situation. Maybe you could just explain to us, because we could take forever.
Sure,
the scale of it is so
yeah.
immense, but it was a horrendous situation for many children.
Yeah, I mean, on my very first visit to Nepal, which was in November '99, which is 10 months after Esther died, I knew absolutely nothing about the country, and it's kind of where do you start, because Nepal's way down that league of the world's poorest countries, and there's so much need. And the only funds that I had at that stage were the funds that I'd put in myself. I had a lump sum for leaving the army, which was £35,000, and I didn't want that to become a drop in the ocean. But then when you see that ocean that's Nepal, you know, where do you begin? And then it was while I was on that first visit, I saw an article on the front page of the Kathmandu Post, and it was about children in prison with their parents. Innocent children who were in jail because there was no one else who was available to look after them or prepared to look after them. And the numbers that were quoted in that article, it said about 100 children. And I thought, well, that's a big number, but it's not that big that I couldn't do something about that with this small amount of money. We set up a children's refuge. We set up a process of actually bringing these kids out of the prisons and putting them in this refuge where they could be looked after, go to school, be in free association with other kids, pending the release of their parents. That was the concept, basically.
Because these are tiny children, some of them, these are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years of age.
Yeah, I mean, this was just a massive breach of child rights, that they were in free association with criminals.
And when the first of many, many youngsters were rescued, I'm sure that's something you can never forget.
It is absolutely embossed in my memory, and it was such a very powerful moment because, you know, remarkably, and to this day, to my amazement, I have always been in complete control, even after Esther's death. I didn't go to pieces. I was very focused. I still can't believe that I was that way for all those months and months and months. But the first 7 children came out of prison, and it was exactly 11 months to the day after Esther's death, and for once, as I've written in my book, the floodgates opened. I was really in tears.
I mean, the jail children was one thing, but
Yes.
then circus children and conscription, commandeered children into becoming circus performers. You then turned your attention to that. You're now at the stage, fast forwarding quite a lot, where some of those youngsters that you did rescue are now working for you in the charities and turned their lives around because of your work. And I know it's not just you, there are countless others involved along the way.
Yes, if you get the kids that you've helped and nurture them, educate them, see them through into adult life, and if they then can become role models at the very least, they might become employees for the charity over in Nepal, and they're a great inspiration actually, and they work from the heart. That's the most important thing of all.
Gates of Bronze, the title of your book, it's a very powerful title.
Yes, it's from the book of Isaiah. It's from chapter 45. I won't recite it because it's quite a long one, but I chose it for a sort of a brass plaque for Esther as a memorial for her, and essentially the piece talks about breaking down gates of bronze, hacking through iron bars, and actually just this power that could be harnessed. And for me, the power that was almost unleashed by the tragedy that happened to Esther broke down a lot of barriers and spilt freedom for all these children. So that's really where it comes from. And I think Esthers Memorial now, it's not in terms of a brass plaque or anything like it. I mean, there's over 1,000 children now who have been freed in her name, and that's her legacy. And there's kids now. There's one in particular who's a young lawyer over in Nepal. A girl who was I rescued her from an Indian circus back in 2004, and she's now a staff lawyer, fighting for kids' rights. And I think Esther would be incredibly proud of that girl.